And it's the moment so many people have waited for. The one and only Harvard professor Avi Loeb joining me now. Whenever he puts out, a new publication, whenever he writes a new paper, we're thinking, yeah, it's great for everyone, and we encourage everyone to go online and read it. But it's even better to have the man himself explaining it to us, for mere mortals in our brains, what we can comprehend. Thank you so much for your time yet again. Welcome back to Chicago Live.
It's a great pleasure to join you.
All right. So this new paper is about 3I Atlas being at a rare full moon phase. Was that just a few hours ago?
Well, it happened yesterday, and very gladly, the Hubble Space Telescope was looking at it, because some places on Earth were cloudy, and I know from observers that couldn't really take good data of it. But just a few hours ago, I received an analysis of the first data from the Hubble Space Telescope on January 22nd, and it looks very interesting. What we see is, once again, this anti-tail, a plume of gas and dust pointed towards the sun. The special thing about January 22nd is that we are looking at the object, 3I Atlas, from the direction of the sun. That's an amazing alignment to within 0.69 degrees that I pointed out in a paper that was published yesterday, just on the day of this alignment. We don't get that privilege very often, even with objects within our solar system. But here we are talking about an interstellar visitor that is very puzzling, and it happens to be yesterday on January 22nd, 2026, opposite to the direction of the sun relative to us. And that means that it's very similar to a situation with a full moon, where the object is being illuminated by the sun, and there is no shadow, no part of the object which is shadowed by the other part. And so we can actually see the reflection of sunlight from the object as well as from dust around it in its full glory, and learn from the brightness rise. There should have been a surge in brightness of 3I Atlas yesterday. From that rise, the level that it gets to, and the rate by which it rises, we can learn about the composition and the size of the dust grains around it, and also something about the object itself, because the anti-tail, this jet that we often saw from the side, pointed towards the sun, is pointing at us. Actually, the rotation axis, the object is rotating every 7.1 hours. This is based on another paper that I submitted for publication a few days ago. We measured the rotation period from the periodic variations in the brightness of the object, but also from the fact that the jet system around it is wobbling. Just like the beam of light from a lighthouse that is wobbling around the rotation or axis of the lighthouse. So we see those jets wobbling in the sky because of the rotation of the object every 7.1 hours or so. And now, actually, the rotation axis is very close to the direction of us, the direction of Earth and the sun, and also the anti-tail, this jet that is pointed towards the sun that we saw wobbling, is now almost pointed at us. But the good news is that we shouldn't worry too much about it pointed at us, because I did a calculation that shows that none of the toxic materials which are being shed by 3I Atlas, for example, we know that there are some materials that are not really good for our health, and it will have no chance of reaching the Earth because the object itself is moving very fast at 60 kilometers per second, and that material is moving with it. It's also being pushed by the solar wind and the solar radiation away from us. And the orbit of 3I Atlas never really went through the circle that the Earth makes around the sun. So there is no risk that these materials will reach us. But it gives us an opportunity to look at it face on. And I looked at the image that was obtained on January 22nd, and what I see is, in addition to the anti-tail, once again, there is a system of 3 mini jets. These are small jets coming out of the nucleus of the object after you remove the spherically symmetric glow around it. So there is a way of filtering out the smooth glow, the spherically symmetric glow around it, and then you are left with 3 jets after applying this filter, which is called Larson-Sekanina filter. And then the 3 jets are separated by 120 degrees, equally from each other on the sky. It looks like a very geometric, symmetric structure. And, the interesting question is whether that is a technological signature, because if you just have random spots on the surface of a rock that have pockets of ice on them, why would they be organized in such an orderly fashion of 3 mini jets equally separated from each other on the sky, in addition to this anti-tail, which is opposite to what you usually see. In comets, you see a tail extending away from the sun. So this jet structure is really peculiar, not explained. It makes one of the anomalies in the list that I provided on medium.com.
And you have explained quite a bit there that I'm sure everyone's kind of leaning in on, and we're already starting to get some questions from our viewers who just love to kind of, poke away at your mind here. One of the questions we have you seen the clearest images of Atlas?
Yeah, so what we see in the image, we can't really see the nucleus because the resolution of the Hubble Space Telescope is not good enough at that distance to resolve the nucleus. It was never good enough, and it would have been much better to have a mission that intercepts the path of 3 Atlas so that we can get a close-up photograph of it. But we don't have that. So all we see is a glowing halo around it, which is extended in the direction of the sun because of the anti-tail. That's what we see in the Hubble image now. That's what we saw in the Hubble image that was obtained early on July 21st, 2025, when the object was heading towards the sun. And that's unusual that there is this anti-tail, a physical jet. It's not a matter of perspective. It's not as if we're looking at it from some special angle, so it looks as if it's pointing at the sun. It actually is pointing at the sun. It was doing that all the way, from the beginning until now. And the question is, what's the physical origin of this anti-tail, which is very peculiar given what we know about other comets that usually show a tail away from the sun. But the more peculiar fact is that there are these mini jets that are very symmetrically oriented around the nucleus. And is it related perhaps to a system of thrusters? And I got a number of emails from people who work on propulsion and stabilization of spacecraft, and they said that that is the kind of design that was proposed by some engineers in the past to stabilize spacecraft along 2 dimensions. And if they rotate along the 3rd dimension, you can imagine the anti-tail is representing the 3rd axis. So it could be a technological signature, but it's not a clear-cut evidence for technology. And of course, we are all waiting to see what will happen on March 16th, 2026, when 3 Atlas will come closest to Jupiter. And it comes exactly at the distance where Jupiter's gravity starts dominating relative to the sun's gravity. So the fundamental question is whether it will release any objects that will become satellites of Jupiter. And a natural rock will never do that, because in order to deposit objects that will stay bound gravitationally to Jupiter, they need to cancel out the motion of 3 Atlas, which is quite large relative to Jupiter. So if we see anything like it, we have the Juno spacecraft monitoring Jupiter right now, and we will have 2 other spacecraft reaching Jupiter by 2030, 2031. And these are the European Space Agency's missions that are called the JUICE and the Europa Clipper. So they're on their way there. And, if there are any new objects around Jupiter, especially at the Lagrange points, we would notice that.
You mentioned Jupiter, and one of our viewers just asked, could it slingshot around Jupiter and head back toward Earth?
Yeah, that's in principle possible because the speed of the object, 3I Atlas, is 60 kilometers per second, which happens to coincide with the escape speed from the surface of Jupiter. Jupiter is not a solid object, it's a gaseous planet, a very massive gaseous planet, may have some rock at its center, but it's also diffuse, and it's a gas giant planet. And but at the surface of Jupiter, the escape speed of, if you wanted to launch a spacecraft that would escape Jupiter, it would need to have a speed of 60 kilometers per second, which is exactly the speed of 3I Atlas. And if 3I Atlas were to graze the surface of Jupiter, it would actually be deflected significantly along its path and could, in principle, return back towards Earth. But it's not coming any so close to Jupiter. It's actually, according to the current trajectory, it will pass within 53.5 million kilometers from Jupiter. So it doesn't look like it's coming close enough to be deflected significantly, and we should expect it to continue along its path. But it could release some smaller objects, of course, and that's what we should monitor for. Of course, if it released already some small objects, they could find the Earth by now or in a few months from now. I was talking before about toxic material that is not able to maneuver. We know that 3I Atlas released cyanide, for example, that would have been quite harmful for life on Earth, but it will never reach us. No concerns about that.
Very interesting stuff. Now, someone says, do you have any update on the CIA refusing to confirm or deny that they have gathered files on Atlas?
Well, no, they are not disclosing any of that. They said that they cannot deny nor confirm the existence or non-existence of such materials, documents. And to me, that illustrates the fact that they did have conversations. And we know that it was not, these conversations were not limited to the US, because there was an end of the year summary in Russia where Vladimir Putin was asked by a journalist what he heard from the intelligence agencies that he has about 3I Atlas. And he was very knowledgeable about 3I Atlas and said that the scientists informed him that it's just a comet. And so these discussions, these conversations happened obviously also in Russia. But at the moment, at least, the public message is that this is just a comet, nothing to worry about, has no technology, there is no evidence. However, these conversations are not really addressing the fundamental questions about the anomalies of 3I Atlas, which are the most interesting aspects. The only opportunity for us to learn is by paying attention to the unusual facts about 3I Atlas. As I mentioned, the existence of this system of 3 jets around the nucleus, and actually the orientation of the trajectory, the path of 3I Atlas in the orbital plane of the planets.
The anti-tail. I'm learning here. So you were mentioning Russian President Vladimir Putin and his response to this, and it leads me to one of the questions that was just posed online. Are scientists in other countries paying as close of attention as you and others here in the U.S.?
Yes, in fact, some of my collaborators are in other countries. I have 2 collaborators from Italy, and they are very focused on getting as much data as possible. One of them just wrote to me overnight. I read it before my morning jog at sunrise, in freezing Boston. And he said, in principle, we cannot detect objects as big as a football field beyond 10 times the Earth-Sun separation. And that is true. And so in principle, if there was a base of technological objects, let's say, beyond the orbit of Neptune, and these objects would be of order the size of objects that we develop, the biggest object that we produced is the Starship rocket, and it's about 120 meters in size, including the booster. So such an object, including the booster, would not be visible. It would not reflect enough sunlight for our best telescopes to detect it beyond the distance of Neptune. So there could be a lot of objects out there that we've never noticed. And if there is a camp of such technological objects out there, we would not know about it unless one of them comes close. And of course, this assumes that we can only detect them from the reflection of sunlight. We have a lamppost, the sun, that allows us to search for keys under the lamppost. But if any of these objects generates their own light, of course, we could detect them even if they're smaller in size. And I wrote a scientific paper I published in 2011 talking about sources of artificial lights in the outer solar system. In principle, if there is an object that produces as much light as the city of Tokyo at the distance of Pluto, we can potentially detect it with the deepest images of the Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope. We should be able to detect a city like Tokyo in the outskirts of the solar system. So, and it's easy to tell that it produces its own light and not just reflecting sunlight, because an object like that will change its brightness inversely with distance squared, just like a light bulb, whereas an object that reflects sunlight is getting dimmer much faster as it goes inversely with distance to the fourth power. So we can tell the difference between an object that produces its own light and an object that is just reflecting sunlight. But there wasn't any serious search for such objects. And in fact, I asked one of the pioneers who found many trans-Neptunian objects beyond the distance of Neptune, the farthest planet. I asked him whether his name is Tim Brown, and whether he checked if any of them produces their own light. And Mike Brown said, no, why should I check? It's obvious that they are just reflecting sunlight. The brightness should change inversely with distance to the fourth, and he didn't really check. So many times in science, the fact that we cannot imagine something different than what we are used to prevents us from checking.
Yeah, I could totally understand that. You were mentioning a lot about light and the sun, and someone asked, with the bright sun, will that give us better pictures?
Yes, in principle, we would get a better image of 3 Atlas. There should be a brightness surge that was available to us on January 22nd. And my hope is that in the coming days and weeks, we will see that those measurements of how much brighter did 3 Atlas get. It's not just the nucleus, it's also the dust particles. For the same reason, it doesn't matter which object we're talking about. When they're illuminated from the same direction that we are observing them, they get brighter, and just like the full moon. And so my hope is that we can learn much more about those dust particles, the structure of them. There should also be a change in the polarization of the light that is reflected by them, depending on the angle that we are observing them relative to the sun. So all of that information, I actually suggested that observers around the world will look at it at 3 Atlas on January 22nd. My hope is that some of them did.
All right. So where do we go from here? You marked March 16, that's sitting in my head now as another time that we need to have another conversation with you. But what happens now?
Yeah, so there is a lot of data that was collected when 3 Atlas came closest to Earth that is not available publicly. The teams that have that data did not disclose it. That includes data from the Webb telescope. They're still analyzing it, presumably, and writing their scientific papers. And once this data comes out, and all the data that leads us to March 16th, when 3I Atlas will come closer to Jupiter. Once all of that data is available publicly, it will be very clear as to whether we can understand the anomalies of 3I Atlas in terms of some natural processes. And at that point, I will be glad to speak with you and tell you my opinion about how likely this object is to be natural versus technological. As of now, it's most likely to be natural, but it might display some new anomalies that make it really strange.
Okay, all right. Well, we know that we're going to be calling you back for that. And I just want to let you know, we got an email that Kim Kardashian's store is opening up here pretty soon. And all of us immediately thought of you and said, hey, we have got to get to Kim Kardashian for Avi Loeb.
I will be delighted to speak with her if she has any questions. And, science is for everyone. And we are all curious, and it's actually fun to figure out things, by looking at the sky. And if she has any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
If we can get her, we promise you we are absolutely going to ask her about
I should mention one more thing that happened, and that is yesterday, the daughter of David Rockefeller, she's 82 years old, came to my office at Harvard, and she wanted to tell me that she was fooled by an AI-generated fake video on YouTube that was providing content that I don't approve, and basically saying that we received the message from the passengers on 3I Atlas that they are not interested in visiting Earth because they're very disappointed by what they learn about us, humanity. And she believed it and shared the video with a lot of her friends, only to find out that it was fake AI generated. So as a result of that visit, I decided to create my own YouTube channel in which I would show real content, scientifically validated content that I work on, and by that prevent from fake videos that spread misinformation from becoming popular. And I think it's a real risk in the future, because it's the biggest threat to science based on integrity, on facts, evidence, and truthfulness. When people are trying to make money by spreading misinformation, and just like junk food is not good for our bodies, junk intellectual food is not good for our brains. And so once I have this YouTube channel available within a few days from now, I will be able to ask the authorities at YouTube to remove all these fake videos. I think we have to learn how to live with the risks from AI. AI is a tool that we can use. It may be a blessing or a curse, depending on whether it's used by good actors or bad actors. And we have to make sure that it's only used by good actors.
We absolutely do. I mean, we just had a press conference that we took here right around this time yesterday with some folks at Capitol Hill that were talking about AI being used for nefarious purposes. So certainly let us know more, and it's always good to have verifiable ways of getting information. So I'm sure, especially with what you do for a living and the information that you're putting out, there will be more and more people trying to use that information for bad, but thank you for using it for good.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And the technology is unable to reproduce a conversation like the one between the two of us. So we are safe in that regard. Everyone should believe the content that the two of us are exchanging. They can only produce a video of me speaking without an interviewer. So, but of course, these technologies will get better, and we have to protect ourselves from misinformation. That's one reason, one of the reasons that we get polarization in society, driven by interest groups that have an agenda that is not truthful. And so we have to fight that. And thank you so much for creating content that is believable.
Well, thank you as well. And we'll have another one of these conversations not too long from now. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Loeb. We always enjoy having you here, and our viewers always go crazy being able to pick your brain.
My pleasure and privilege. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Have a good weekend.